Hello. So I got this computer from the thrift store for about $50, and I wanted to go on a bit of an adventure, so I bought it. And I'm hoping, of course, that I can upgrade it a bit and then sell it for at least what I paid for it. And it's not a terribly remarkable thing. It's a Dell Inspiron 620. It's a fine looking system. It's got a little front door with, let me turn on the light. It's got a, where is it going? Oh yes. It's got a little front panel. Probably can't really see it. Nah, not really. But there are two USB ports, microphone, headphone jack, and SD card reader. An optical drive of some kind, who really cares? A output, 300 watts, 300 watt power supply. 500 gigabyte hard drive, and I don't know if you can hear that, but it sounds really, really bad. It's beyond crunchy. It's kind of like reallocated sectors out the wazoo kind of sound to it. But I'm about to check with crystal disk info. There's not really a whole lot going on here. A stick of 4 gigs, a stick of 2 gigs. The side information panel when I bought it said 8 gigs, but I looked at the sticks and it clearly says 4 and 2, and looking in Task Manager it very clearly says 6 gigs, 1333 megahertz. I haven't pulled out the sticks yet, so I don't know. I'm assuming that it's downclocking to the 2 gig stick. I imagine that the 4 gig stick is clocked higher, but I could be wrong. And it's DDR3, of course. This 500 gigabyte hard drive does not sound amazing, though. But, oh well. And, multi-card USB device. That's strange. Seems to be reading the SD card reader built into the system as a generic multi-card USB device. That just seems like a weird driver thing. I haven't connected this thing to the internet. This was a, looks like a fresh install of Windows at the charity shop that I bought it from, put on here. So it's just a bog standard install of Windows. I don't even know if it had any of the drivers installed. It took a long time to get working though, and it kept flashing an image onto the screen. I guess because it didn't have a proper driver for this monitor. And I popped out the HDMI and plugged in the VGA, and that seemed to fix it. But I'm sure that a proper driver will get that sorted. Anyways, yeah, it turns out there's an i3 2100. I knew there was going to be an i3 in here because it said on the front, there was a front badge that said Intel Core i3. But that's not a very useful thing to someone who knows what they're looking for and talking about. It might make a consumer go, ooh, Core i3, and start getting hot in the pants or something. Well, maybe more like something like an i7. I've seen i7s, like second gen i7s, but people hear i7 and they think, wow, that's a great performance. I don't know. The naming scheme from Intel is weird, I think. But that's neither here nor there. Yeah, it's got 2 cores. Hey, it at least has hyperthreading. Look at that. It's got a nice hyperthreading right there. And 3.1 gigahertz. That's not too bad at all, actually. Not too bad at all. Especially for a basic kind of office computer. 128 megabytes. Well, that would be a lot of cache. That would be a fuck lot of cache for L1 cache. 128 kilobytes of L1 cache. 512 keep saying gigabytes and megabytes. I am really tired. It is early in the morning and I have not slept. I'm guessing, however, the CMOS is good. I didn't test the CMOS, but I'm guessing the CMOS is good because it actually is the correct time. So I'm guessing the CMOS is okay. And yeah, 512 kilobytes of L2 cache and 3 megabytes of L3 cache. And the only real expansion opportunities on the system. Also, I like the exposed chipset. It's obviously a really low power chipset because it doesn't even have a anything on it. It doesn't even have like a piece of metal, nothing. But there are holes in the motherboard, I guess, for if they were to put on a more powerful chipset. Might as well get the mounting mechanism there. I don't know if that chip is getting hot or not. I'm not going to touch it, but I'm going to kind of move my finger close to it. And I don't even feel any heat coming off of it. So I'm sure the manufacturers know what they're doing. And if bare silicon is good enough, then bare silicon is good enough. I mean, there's no way a company like Dell or any other OEM is going to, or company in general, is going to spend money where they don't have to spend money. Anyways, full-size PCIe slot, times 16. I'm assuming that's either Gen 2 or Gen 3, based on the age of this system. And it looks like the hard drive finally calmed down. Wow, look at that. Stop making noise. I wonder if you could even hear that noise, but it was making a lot of noise. And then 2 times 1 slots. I mean 3 times 1 slots. But any sort of graphics card of note is going to be covering up at least one of those slots. But yeah, it still has plenty of expansion opportunities. You could easily throw like a USB 3.0 card in there, get some high-speed connectivity. Yeah, and it has a slot up here, so one could even like put a USB 3.0 breakout, front panel breakout thing that some USB 3.0 expansion cards have. Yeah, which is important, I think. There are many things you could do with those slots, but that's just one of them. Very important, I think, considering the I/O is somewhat lacking. I don't know the speed of all those USBs, but I'm assuming they're all 2.0s. Looking at the actual physical connector, none of them are 3.0, I know, because 3.0 has a physically different connector. It has more pins, basically. You can look up pictures and see the difference. But you can't really know if it's a 1.0 or a 2.0 just by looking at it. But yeah. I mean, yes, there is the plastic color, the color of the plastic, but that's not actually official. Those are just guidelines. So manufacturers can make them whatever color they want. But yeah. And yeah, and then you have like a little basic integrated sound system right there. VGA, HDMI, I'm assuming that's gigabit Ethernet, but it might also be like 100, but I'm assuming it's gigabit. And yeah, I think that's about it. I mean, there really isn't a whole lot going on here. It's a boring, bland office computer. I don't know what kind of graphics this thing has yet until I get a driver going, but I'm assuming it's something in the HD range, or maybe even UHD. But what I do know is it's not a very powerful processor, because the heatsink is stone cold. Which means either there's no thermal transfer going on to the heatsink, which would be bad and maybe not surprising given how I don't think this thing has ever had its paste changed, or probably more accurately, it's just a very low power chip. I'm going to plug in my utilities flash drive, and then I'm going to check out some stuff. Crystal disk info. There we are. Let's see what we have on here in terms of disk. I don't think it's going to be great. Oh, says good. Maybe it's just a crunchy hard drive. Oh, well. Yeah. Yikes. I am honestly surprised its status is good. Maybe it was taken care of. I don't know. But that is very, very surprising. And it looks like it's a SATA 2 drive. So that's 300 megabytes a second effective. Of course, it probably won't ever get up to that because it's a hard drive, but yeah. Either way, definitely an older drive. But I'm surprised that everything is good to go here. Huh. Fascinating. Oh, I'm surprised. Pleasantly surprised. It's not like I wanted it to be failing, it's just made a hell of a lot of noise, more than usual. Let's open up the open hardware monitor and check some of those temps. Device info might actually recognize the graphics or something like that. Wow, yeah, that's just a very efficient chip, it looks like. I mean, it's not really doing a whole lot, but I mean, you can tell that it's very much not an excessively hot chip. Yeah. And when I actually put some stress on it, we'll see, maybe that might change. Oh wow, look at that. Maxed out at 10 watts for the CPU package. Wow. Yeah, that's not surprising that it did not get hot at all. It's only 10 watts at max so far. Currently hovering in the 4.2 watt range, 4-ish watt range. Yeah. And yep, using 15. And I'm gonna open up Device Manager. And see what it says. Maybe it'll give an indication of the graphics. I mean, I could just look up the graphics for it. Intel HD graphics. Huh. I'll update you later on when I find out exactly what kind, but it's about what I expected. HD to UHD. I didn't think it would be UHD, but I'm not exactly sure when UHD took off from HD. But given the age of the CPU, I was assuming, and the low, I mean, it's only a second gen, I was assuming it would be HD. Maybe like HD 530 graphics or something. Yep. Well, I'll get back to you soon with an update when I get all the drivers installed and whatnot. For now, I'm just going to use the hard drive it came with, because why not? But I might also swap it out for an SSD. We'll see. I'll let you know then. But first I'm going to go sleep. So I have all the drivers installed for Windows, and it turns out that the CPU is, well, as I said, the i3-2100, and the graphics for that are the HD Graphics 2000, which is unfortunate because the best CPU that this thing can handle is this 3770, and it is a much better chip. But oh well, I could upgrade it. I'm considering the validity of upgrading this thing to the 3770, not the K variant, because this chipset can't do overclocking anyways. turns out that the chipset is the H61 chipset. And the H61 chipset is a very basic chipset. I mean, as you can see, it doesn't support SATA 3. It doesn't support RAM or CPU overclocking, just GPU. Only 10 USB 2.0 ports at a maximum, which this thing almost has. This thing has 8 in total. And yeah, it's, as I said, as I predicted, it's PCIe 2.0, PCIe 2.0. And yeah, it's mostly nose, not a very advanced chip, but oh well. And according to this list, it says that the best CPU you can put in here is this 3770K, but this chipset can't support overclocking anyway, so there's no point in doing that. Anyways, so this is the one that I would put in there if I were to upgrade it. And I found them on eBay for about $40. Buy it now, free shipping. So that's definitely something one could do, and it would be a welcome upgrade to this thing. Because the 2100 is a fairly basic CPU. Was there anything else I wanted to show? Got the CPU covered, and I mean, there's really not a lot going on here. If you look again at the motherboard and the overall system, there's not really a whole lot to do. There are not really a lot of upgrade opportunities. And by the way, I did touch the chipset, and it does get quite hot. But again, it's not hot enough to warrant a heatsink, I'm assuming, because they didn't put one on. And I'm assuming if they didn't put on a chipset heatsink, that the chipset does not need a heatsink. But maybe that's just me being generous. I mocked up a little potential system based on the prices in my area and some other stuff that I have and stuff I don't have. So some of this stuff I already have. But yeah, it's not exactly the case, of course. Like, this motherboard is not that motherboard, but of course in PC Part Picker it's not going to have some Dell OEM nonsense. But it's a very similar motherboard with like what it has. And so I put in this 8 gigs of 1600 RAM, as that's the max it supports. Now, of course, one can go higher than what it supports, but it can lead to system instability and whatnot like that. And while I might be able to fix that or fix the issue or something, I'm going to be selling this computer, I think. And so the person who buys it just wants it to work in all likelihood, unless they're a tinkerer. And if they're a tinkerer, they're probably not going to buy something like this. They're probably going to buy either something more powerful or maybe build their own, or whatever the case happens to be. This is a computer for basically a college student who just needs something basic that one can also play some games on or whatever one needs to do. The big problem with this CPU, other than it would add to the cost of the thing, of the system, the big problem with the CPU is that it might need a BIOS update. I need to check with the BIOS stuff, but I could upgrade the BIOS. But generally speaking, unless you need to, you shouldn't. But it's something I could look into. This CPU is definitely way more capable than the 2100, though. The 2100 is the bottom tier version of the i3 second generation. I don't know if that really makes a lot of sense. Let me rephrase that. In terms of Sandy Bridge, for this socket type, it starts at the 2100, and the 3210 for the Ivy Bridge third generation, basically. Basically, this is the second gen, and this is the third gen for this socket, and it goes from 2 to 3 gen. It goes from Gen 2 to Gen 3. I'm tired. My brain's scattered. Maybe we're all like that. I mean, it is Tuesday, and it's past midnight, so yeah. But anyways, by the way, this is probably the most I've ever used Bing in my entire life. I've just been too lazy to install Chrome on it, which I know is a really quick process, but I was like, whatever. In for a penny, in for a pound. And I gotta say, I do not like using Bing, especially when searching. It's so strange. I don't like the way it searches things. But whatever. Anyways, there are, of course, less powerful ones I could put in, like, say, this 3220. But I figure that if I'm going to put in an upgrade, it might as well be from like 2 cores, 4 threads to at least 4 cores, 4 threads, and preferably 4 cores, 8 threads. And also that would have and it would also have the benefit not just of increasing the horsepower of the CPU to better match with a better GPU, which is one of the problems this chip is having when I'm looking into it, is that it's just too weak for most GPUs unless you're looking at something like this GT430, but that's not really much of an upgrade. But also the graphics are much more capable, as I mentioned. This isn't great, but it's certainly better than the 2000 series graphics. It's double the name, but it's actually over twice as powerful. So, yeah. Anyways, at least by cores and texture mapping units and raster output pipelines, shader units and whatnot. Anyways, yeah. It's not it's not official necessarily, but it's just a little mock-up. So the last thing I wanted to talk about to end this part 1 of this video on this one, until I get around to getting all the components and selling it, or at least trying to sell it, listing it for sale. In terms of upgrades, I was thinking that I would put the SSD here because I want to keep these sleds available for hard drives. And the SSD could literally just be screwed in with one screw here, and that would be just fine. This SATA power connector here, that's obviously meant for this secondary optical drive, it wouldn't be able to reach without an extension cable, and it would probably be better just to plug in the SSD just directly there. I mean, it's an SSD, it doesn't really need to be secured down. So, yeah, I'd probably just connect it directly there and just let it hang around inside the drive bay. I might also use that drive bay for something that I'll talk about very soon. But yeah, I'm not sure what this is exactly. I couldn't find any information about it. It's not a floppy drive holder. It's too big. It's a 5 1/4 inch. It's a 3 1/2 inch drive slot. But it's most certainly not a floppy drive connector because A, it doesn't line up with the front. B, this is not it's not the right kind of output. This is the front panel connector area. It's possible that it was at one point capable of holding a floppy drive. I'm not entirely sure what its purpose is. I was planning on just mounting an SSD there or something like that, potentially, or just leaving it blank. As the case happens to be, since as I said, I'll probably just stick the SSD loose in there. I have a 1 terabyte hard drive I was planning on putting in here because this drive is not only 500 gigabytes. The main problem with this drive, honestly, in terms of using it and selling it in the system, is that it has a lot of power on hours. I think I actually mentioned how I'm kind of surprised that it's not worse than it is, given the kind of sounds that it makes, and also that how old it is. I'm surprised it's still going strong, actually. Because when we load this up, eventually, it's kind of out of RAM, which is something I'll talk about soon in terms of upgrades. I mean, if we look here, we can see that it is definitely not doing well in terms of RAM. Now, mind you, I do have a shitload of tabs open, so it's not entirely fair to blame it. But still, 6 gigs is definitely way better than 4 gigs, but it's still just not amazing. Anyways, once this application comes up, it'll tell you, I think, yeah, 9,107 power on times with 67,680 hours, which equates to 7 years and 265 days. That's a lot of time to be on. And yeah, that's a hell of a long time, yet surprisingly, it's still in good condition, which I find surprising. But hey, whatever, I'll take it. Anyways, even though it has many hours on it, it says it's in good condition, and it's not like I have a better use for it. So I could just keep it in there along with the 1 terabyte drive and the 500 gigabyte SSD, and it would give the person who buys this a lot of storage capacity. Or I could swap this out for the 1 terabyte while still giving a slot available for easy upgrading with another hard drive or SSD. We'll see. I'll probably make some talking. I'll probably talk to the potential buyer and say, hey, I'll probably list it at a basic configuration and then say, hey, if you want, I could give you this or that or the other. Give them like a bit of a customization opportunity. That way everybody wins. Everybody gets what they want. Anyways, in terms of the RAM, I did select for it this 8 gig kit, which is also running at a faster speed. I could just pop out that 2 gig stick. I actually have a spare 4 gig stick, which I think is running at 1600 megahertz. The problem with that is that mismatched RAM is not best. It's best to have a kit in terms of performance, and this thing needs all the performance it can get, especially if you're going to be gaming on this thing. But also, it would mean that it would downclock to 1333 megahertz. And as I said before, it's really nice to have every little bit that one can have. 1600 and 1333 megahertz, there's not a lot of difference there, but if it's the difference between 2 frames per second in a game, especially if it's the 1% lows, which the memory might very well impact the 1% lows, that's really where it's going to be extra useful. But yeah, there's a chassis fan header buried deep in there apparently, which I did not notice until looking at the motherboard manual. You can see it right there, next to that, right under that capacitor. And I don't know what that's supposed to go to. I'm guessing it's just because this is a general motherboard design that OEMs use. They just have a general design that they add or subtract from, depending on who's buying it and how much they're paying. I suppose one could mount a fan on there. It would just be a bit of a strange mount, but one could. The point is one could. One could even, with 4 SATA plugs and 4 SATA power cables, even just plug in 4 whole drives if one wanted. One could have an SSD and 3 hard drives if one wanted. It's up to them. Yeah, that's basically about it, other than the expansion slots. Now, as for the expansion slots, that main slot, I was of course planning on putting a graphics card in, depending of course on what the person wants to buy the system wants out of it. And then I would recommend on one of those slots using a Wi-Fi card, because I think it's nice to have Wi-Fi. But if they don't want Wi-Fi, that's also fine. I have Wi-Fi PCIe ×1 cards that they could have if they wanted to pay for that upgrade. And I also would recommend to the person to put a USB 3.0 card in there, because all that's on the system is USB 2.0. Now, while it is true that, let me just pull up this nice little chart, PCIe speed chart. Yeah. Let's see images. Anyways, so if you look at this chart, well, I need to cough again. All right, sorry about that. Anyways, I decided while I was at it, while I paused the recording to find a better chart. I think this chart is easier to understand, especially if you don't really know a lot about computers. But as you can see, for PCIe 2.0 at 1x, it's going to be 0.5 gigabytes a second. Now, now the thing is that USB 3.0 is nominally, it effectively isn't always, usually isn't anyways, but it can be as high as 480 megabytes a second. So at 500 megabytes a second, why am I so coffee right now? Coffee is a fun phrase, fun thing to say, because it's a noun, but it's also an adjective. But it's kind of a weird sounding adjective, probably because the drink exists. But it's spelled completely differently, of course, because that's English. Anyways, if this were PCIe 1.0, then this would be a definite hampering of the USB 3.0 speed. But because it's 2.0, it can actually do the full speed. But anyways, back to the system. Oh, wow. Maybe I just need to drink something. Maybe I haven't drunk anything in a while. Anyways, I'm almost done with this recording. But yeah, so I would put a Wi-Fi Bluetooth card in there because I think it's nice to have. Not necessary, but nice to have. And I would also put a USB 3.0 card in there as well, as I think that is more than nice to have and is actually just downright really useful. One could even put two USB 3.0 cards in there, each with, say, 2 ports, and have a usable amount of USB 3.0 on the system. And that top × 1 slot is probably going to be covered up by the graphics card, but it depends on the graphics card. Anyway, so that's I think a good overview of the upgrades I'm thinking about making to the system, but part of it will be depending on what the buyer wants. If the buyer just wants this system as it is stock, or with just an SSD or maybe a slightly bigger capacity hard drive, or maybe like twice as big, like a 1 terabyte hard drive that doesn't have as many power on hours, and a fresh install of Windows, if that's all they want is just a hard drive change, then that's what they can get. I believe firmly in the idea of the customer telling the person building the system what they want and what they don't want, and that both parties can come to an agreeable situation. But yeah, that's it for this one. So one of the shorter videos I made, well, maybe still like, I don't even know, 40 minutes, 30, 40 minutes, I'm not sure. I think the first recording of this, the first part of this video, I think it was like 10 minutes or maybe 15, whatever. The point is, not a terribly complicated thing I'm looking at or that you're looking at. I just thought it would be fun to share the system that I paid only $50 for. But yeah, I am going to show you one last thing before I end the video, but it'll be a bit of a jump cut. So after the jump cut, I want to show you something funny. Hello there. It is now the next day. I did mention how I wanted to show you something strange, and that is that it lists 8 gigs of RAM, but as you saw, only had 6 gigs. The processor is correct, although it doesn't actually list the processor, it just lists the clock speed, but whatever. 64-bit operating system, that's true. Intel i3, that's also true. The drive storage, I've never seen anyone write the amount that you see after you format it. I've only ever seen it written as 500 gigs. But that's not necessarily a bad thing to list it as 465. Because that way, when someone who knows nothing about computers gets home and they format, and then they look at the drive, they see that it is, or do a reformat, or whatever they do with it, they'll see that it indeed does only have 465 gigabytes. So I don't necessarily mind that being that way. Manufactured in 2011, sure. Dell Inspiron 620, that's true. It's mainly just the 8 gigs of RAM. Makes me wonder, did someone switch it out or something? Did someone did they test it, print out this label thing, and then someone decided at the last minute to swap in a 4 for a 2 gig stick? I have no idea. Maybe they already printed it out, but you think in that case they would cross out the 8 and write 6. Maybe they meant 6. That's probably what happened, is they probably meant 6 and accidentally hit 8. But whatever. Just something I find very curious. Anyways, that's it for this video. Still not entirely sure what I'm going to do with this. I think I'm going to upgrade it and sell it, but we'll see. It's a decent little system, I'd say. One thing I do need to do, though, before I upgrade the processor is I need to make sure that the BIOS update, if there is a BIOS update available, because I kind of just worked on the assumption that I could update the BIOS, but I'm not sure if they ever made a BIOS that supports 3rd generation Intel processors. They probably did, but they may not necessarily have it available on the Dell website. So it's possible I might have to go digging in forums or Internet Archive or something. I don't know. We'll see.